A Great Argead Saga Alexine, Alexander the Great. Volume 2, Laches, The Sacred Band. By Macaulay Naki. Episode 4, Bounty of Boeotia. Early evening, House of Archidamus. The evening meal set before them was far more lavish than anything the old veteran's household had seen in years. Following the bitter austerity of the Spartan war years, and the quiet, meager meals shared by an aging couple, the oak dining table groaned under the weight of roasted hare seasoned with wild thyme, thick loaves of freshly baked barley bread, bowls of honeyed olives, and deep earthen jugs of diluted red wine. Archidamus stared down at the bounty, a slow, unfamiliar warmth blooming in his chest. "We haven't hosted a feast like this since our daughter's wedding," Archidamus thought, his hard, weathered features loosening as the severe lines around his mouth finally softened. For years, this hearth has tasted only of isolation and the lingering ghost of war. These northern babes, they were brought here as leverage, but looking at them now, they feel less like hostages and more like a sunrise. Across the table, Gorgo was visibly delighted and enlightened, her eyes bright with a vibrant, youthful energy that had been absent from her face since the dark days following Leuctra. She beamed as she reached out, carving off a tender piece of meat and placing it onto young Phormio's wooden trencher. The house is loud again, Gorgo thought, a fierce, protective joy swelling behind her ribs as she listened to the clumsy clatter of bronze cups and small fingers fumbling with bread. The halls were too silent, too full of dust and memory. These little ones have brought our joy back once again. The kings in Pella thought they were sending us pawns, but they have sent us life. Even the household servants and maids, usually moving through the rooms with silent, ghost-like efficiency of mourners, caught the infectious warmth. A young kitchen maid named Melissa grinned broadly as she refilled Cylon's cup with fresh spring water, wiping a stray tear of happiness from her cheek before stepping back into the shadows. Little Cletus, who had been trembling just an hour ago, stared wide-eyed at the roasted meat before him. "There are no guards watching us here," Cletus thought, his stomach rumbling loudly enough to echo in the quiet space between courses. "And the bread smells of sweet honey and oil. Maybe this place isn't a dungeon after all." Lysias watched Archidamus carefully, still testing the boundaries of his new reality. "He isn't yelling at us," Lysias thought, his shoulders finally dropping away from his ears as he took a cautious bite of the spiced hare. In Pella, the generals only spoke when someone made a mistake. Here, they're just watching us eat. "Eat up, little ones," Archidamus rumbled gently, lifting his own cup of wine in a quiet, solemn toast to the hearth. "You won't survive the training yards on an empty stomach. Tomorrow, your true education begins, but tonight, you eat like princes." Phormio, utterly captivated by the rich flavors, looked up with crumbs dotting his chin. "Is there honey bread too?" he asked shyly, his earlier terror completely forgotten. Gorgo let out a warm, ringing laugh that echoed off the high stone walls, banishing the last lingering shadows of the evening. "There is as much honey bread as you can possibly eat," Gorgo smiled, leaning down to ruffle the boy's dusty curls. "Welcome to Thebes, my sons. Eat your fill." Their long, grueling trek south had finally culminated in this impossible feast. Along the way, food had been a sparse, uncertain thing, and they had occasionally been forced to fight against the gnawing ache of hunger. Making camp during the march had been a deeply strange, disorienting experience, forcibly separated from their parents and families, thrust into the punishing rhythm of a military march designed for grown warriors. Though their personal attendants and helpers had traveled with them, constantly hovering in worry and desperate to shield them from the worst of the road, the entire journey had been an exercise in sheer survival. There was no time to play or explore the roadside, 6-year-old Cylon thought, staring down at the laden table with wide, disbelieving eyes. Every week was strict, just march, and sleep. To ease the crushing weight of the days, all they could do was look endlessly out at the passing scenery, swallow their fear, and watch the magnificent, indifferent night sky wheel above their tents before falling into an exhausted sleep. "I used to dream of meat like this back on the trail when my belly felt like a hollow cave," 7-year-old Lysias thought, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached out to break off a piece of warm, honeyed loaf. "Is this really ours to eat? Or is it a dream?" Sitting around the groaning table in the warmth of the Theban hearth, the little boys of Macedon almost entirely forgot the dust, the cold camps, and the terror of the road. For the first time since leaving Pella, the heavy armor of their fear slipped away, replaced by the simple, glorious miracle of a full stomach and a safe roof. House of Pelopidas. The heavy, oil-soaked torches mounted along the exterior stone walls of the Pelopidas estate flickered against the deepening Boeotian twilight. Inside the cool, marble-columned atrium, the air carried the faint sense of cedar, roasted meat, and the metallic tang of polished greaves. For the 4 young Macedonian boys standing awkwardly near the entrance, this house was not a sanctuary. It was the lair of the wolf of the south. For weeks they had endured the relentless, bone-wearying march across mountain passes and river valleys, herded south as political hostages under the watchful eye of Theban guards. To their terrified, exhausted minds, General Pelopidas loomed larger than life, a terrifying adult whose very name was whispered with dread back in Pella. A ruthless strategist who shattered Spartan armies and dragged foreign princes from their homes. Now they were expected to live under his roof. Corhugis tried desperately to hold back tears, standing tall with a fierce, trembling pride. If I cry, they will think Macedonian blood is weak, Corhugis thought, his small chest heaving as he watched Ariston and Timoclea, with wide, evaluating eyes that betrayed the deep, hammering panic in his chest. He is the general who broke the invincible phalanx. Will he chain us in the dark? Beside him, Menelaus was hyper-vigilant, unrestless, clutching the coarse fabric of his travel, stained tunic as he looked around the unfamiliar atrium. Too many exits, too many stone pillars, Menelaus thought, his eyes darting frantically from shadow to shadow, completely overwhelmed by the sharp foreign accents of the household servants whispering nearby. Where is the road back north? We are trapped inside the enemy's den. Simmias stood dead silent, deeply homesick, and swallowing hard against a mounting sob, keeping his gaze fixed firmly on the cold marble floor tiles to hide his trembling lower lip. Mother is 1,000 leagues away, Simmias thought, a hot tear finally slipping down his cheek to strike the stone. The horses are gone. Everything is strange. And Polemon, the youngest of the 4, was utterly bewildered. He clutched a small brass belt buckle, dropped by his older brother back in Pella, as if it were a magical talisman meant to ward off the alien, terrifying gods of Thebes. Watching them from the steps leading to the inner chambers stood Timoclea. She found herself in a strange, emotionally suspended place. She was simultaneously embarrassed by the sudden influx of foreign children and racked with quiet worry. Her marriage to Pelopidas had never been a sweeping romance born of whispered courtships or stolen glances. It was an alliance forged out of harsh necessity during the darkest years of Spartan occupation, when 2 citizens joined hands simply to survive the terror of the occupation. He had given her a son, Ariston, and she demanded nothing more from a husband whose life belonged entirely to the state. Yet, standing here looking at these motherless northern babes, a complex maternal ache stirred behind her ribs. He brings home the children of our enemies, while his own hearth gathers dust, Timoclea thought, her fingers tightening around her woolen stala. He thinks this will occupy my mind during his endless absences. But they are just frightened little ones. How can I mother the sons of the very kings who threaten our borders? A few paces away, their 13-year-old son, Ariston, stood in an equally strange space. His father was home, yet Pelopidas was never truly here. To Ariston, his father was a legendary figure, the great general who, alongside Epaminondas, had overthrown Spartan dominance and liberated the Cadmea. But such glory came at a heavy price. Pelopidas returned only periodically, staying for brief, intense bursts before vanishing for long months back to the barracks or the front lines. Even when he was technically in Thebes, Pelopidas mostly remained sequestered in his military quarters, consumed by the crushing weight of statecraft. Ariston remembered his early childhood vividly, the suffocating, terrified years spent living under the iron-fisted Spartan suppression, whispering in darkened rooms, watching neighbors dragged away. Because of those dark memories, Ariston understood his father's mission. He understood Pelopidas's burning passion to liberate other Greek cities, to shatter tyranny, and to unite Hellas into a peaceful, free community for all. Yet, looking at the 4 shivering Macedonian boys, Ariston felt a sharp pang of empathy cut through his youthful pride. Father fights to free nations, but he leaves us to manage the collateral, Ariston thought, shifting his weight on the stone floor as he met Corhugis' terrified gaze. They look at us like we're jailers. They don't know what it's like to live in the shadow of an empire. But they're just kids. Exactly like I was when the Spartans ruled our streets. Ariston took a deliberate step forward, breaking the tense silence of the atrium. He looked down at small Polemon, who was still clutching his brother's brass buckle. "You're safe here," Ariston said quietly, his voice carrying a calm, grounded maturity far beyond his 13 years. He offered a small, reassuring nod to Corregus, whose trembling pride finally began to ease. "You don't have to be afraid of the general. Come on, my mother had the kitchens prepare warm broth. You must be freezing, bread and iron." The grand dining hall of the page quarters. The grand dining hall of the page quarters was a cavernous timber-beamed pavilion where the scent of roast lamb, garlic, and pine smoke hung heavy in the air. Long wooden trestle tables stretched down the length of the hall, crowded with dozens of Boeotian youths whose boisterous laughter and clattering bronze cups echoed off the whitewashed walls. Seated tightly together near the far end of the hall were the newly arrived Macedonian boys of Category 2. 11-year-old Phaeditus, 10-year-old Archidamus, 9-year-old Pollicles, 8-year-old Drusillus, and their immediate peers. They sat in a defensive collective huddle, their foreign accent and unfamiliar cadence clipping their words slightly as they murmured among themselves. "Every eye in this hall is on us," Phaeditus thought, his hand resting protectively near Drusillus' shoulder as he scanned the room with a quiet, watchful maturity. "They aren't just looking at strangers, they're looking at collateral. We have to watch every move we make." Archidamus scowled, his sharp tongue twitching as he stared down at the simple barley bread and roasted meat on his wooden trencher. Let them stare, Archidamus thought, his jaw tight with competitive defiance. They think because we are young and displaced we'll cower. I'll fight any one of them across the training yard tomorrow if they test us. Pollicles kept his head slightly lowered, his analytical mind quietly working like a ledger. 3 exits from this hall, Pollicles calculated silently, noting the heavy doors and the high, unglazed windows. 2 guards stationed by the main entrance. If a riot broke out, this room is a trap. But the food is wholesome and no one is chained. Drusillus clutched a small piece of flatbread, his wide eyes darting nervously toward the neighboring tables, where the local students sat. "I want to go home," Drusillus thought, a sudden lump forming in his throat as the foreign murmurs washed over him. "The horses are gone, Pella is a month away, and these people talk so loudly." All around them, the whispering among the Theban students grew sharper. "Look at them," muttered a local boy a few tables down, nudging his companion. "They are the Theban hostage noble boys." Another student frowned, leaning back from his cup. "Are they going to try to stab us in our sleep? Their fathers marched with Amyntas. They're practically barbarians." At the head of the middle table, a senior Theban student named Theognetus overheard the hostile murmurs. He set his bronze cup down firmly on the wood, his gaze sweeping across his peers with a quiet, authoritative gravity. Theognetus was being educated not merely to appear clever, but to be genuinely intelligent, a true product of a city whose fathers had recently bled to shatter Spartan dominance and slavery. Their civic pride was different. It was rooted in the belief that true power meant making the world a better, more united place, rather than crushing the weak under a tyrant's heel. "Don't look at them like enemies," Theognetus said clearly, his voice carrying over the din of the hall and silencing the surrounding whispers. "They are our honorary guests. We must respect them, and we must be friendly." He stood up from his bench, smoothing down his tunic, and walked deliberately across the stone floor toward the isolated Macedonian table. Phaeditus instantly stiffened, squaring his shoulders, while Archidamus's hand twitched toward his belt. Theognetus stopped beside their bench, offering a warm, open smile that completely disarmed the tension in the air. "Welcome to Thebes, my brothers," Theognetus said, his voice steady and entirely devoid of mockery. "If you need help finding your way around the gymnasium, or if you just need someone to translate the mess hall rules, just ask. Iron Hall of Academia. Field Cadets Mess Hall." The vaulted ceiling of the Field Cadets Mess Hall echoed with the steady metallic clatter of hundreds of bronze cups and wooden trenchers. Unlike the academic quiet of the page quarters or the intimate warmth of private estates, this cavernous hall was an engine of martial friction. Seated together near the far end of the long, grease-stained trestle tables were the 5 older Macedonian youths of Category 1, Batus 14, Logos 14, Iolaus 17, Agis 15, and Sinane 16. They formed a tight, isolated collective in the heart of the military complex. Unlike the younger boys who still carried the soft, vulnerable edges of childhood, these high teens were polished, physically developed, and hardened by the rigors of northern hunting and court life. They sat as disciplined young warriors in training, their broad shoulders and watchful stances instantly commanding a grudging acknowledgement from the native Boeotian cadets around them. They are watching us like hawks waiting for a weak flank, Iolaus thought, his jaw locked as he stared down at his bowl of plain barley porridge and salted fish. His broad shoulders remained tense beneath his tunic, ready to spring at the slightest provocation. They want to see if our pride cracks under their coarse food and rigid rules. I won't give them the satisfaction. Agis kept his eyes fixed on the heavy oak beams overhead, his high-strung, articulate mind quietly mapping every exit and calculating the ratio of Theban cadets to Macedonian hostages in the room. 420 men in this hall, Agis calculated silently, his fingers tapping a rhythmic, nervous tattoo against the edge of the wood. If a riot broke out over insulted honor, we'd be overwhelmed in seconds. We have to keep our tempers in check at least until we know where the armory keys are kept. Sinane let out a low, cynical scoff, leaning back lazily against the wooden bench with a sharp smirk playing on his lips. Look at them pretending they aren't staring, Sinane thought, his gaze sweeping over a group of older Theban hoplites glaring from across the aisle. They think because we were brought down here in chains of diplomacy that we're broken game. One good push in the training yard tomorrow, and I'll show them how Pella fights. Logos sat quietly beside them, his eyes steady and unblinking as he surveyed the massive hall. No use glaring back at them, Logos thought, keeping his expression neutral, while his mind quietly took in the rigid discipline of the servers and the layout of the tables. A king's house watches everything before it strikes. Let them think we're just brooding boys. Battus, however, remained entirely still. His slender frame masked a fierce, calculating intellect that ignored the hostile glares entirely. Let them size us up, Battus thought, his dark eyes narrowing as he observed the seamless clockwork efficiency of the Theban mess hall service. They aren't trying to humiliate us, they're trying to assimilate us into an unstoppable machine. Anger is a waste of breath. Every rule they enforce here is a tactical blueprint, and I intend to steal every page. Before any of them could voice their thoughts, heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel-dusted stone floor behind them. A senior Theban drill instructor, a scarred, thick-necked veteran named Polyphontes, halted abruptly at the end of their bench. He slapped a heavy wooden ledger down onto the table, rattling the trenchers and cutting through the murmurs of the surrounding cadets. "Listen well, northern whelps," Polyphontes barked, his voice cutting through the hall with the authority of a whip crack. "In your courts at Pella, you probably ate off gold and threw your scraps to the dogs. Here, the rule of the mess is simple. You eat what is served, you clear your own trenchers when the bell rings, and you speak only when spoken to. The phalanx does not care about royal pedigrees or how soft your hands were back north. Tomorrow at dawn, the line forms in the gravel yard. If you're late, you starve until noon. Dismissed to your eating." Polyphontes turned sharply on his heel, striding away without waiting for a response. Iolaus slammed his fist softly against the table, his face flushing with hot northern pride. "Did you hear the tone of that grease-stained hound?" Iolaus muttered under his breath, his eyes burning. "Treating us like common mercenaries." Battus reached out, placing a steady, cold hand over Iolaus's clenched fist to anchor him. "Save your anger for the shield wall, Iolaus," Battus said quietly, his tone absolute and unyielding. "He's testing us. Eat your bread. Tomorrow, we show them what a Macedonian can do when the lines collide." Late evening, House of Pamines. The walk from the Thermae back to the House of Pamines felt infinitely longer than the journey there. Refreshed by the hot water and steam, the cumulative physical burden of the long southern road, weeks of relentless saddle soreness, dust-choked throats, and bruised muscles finally crashed down upon the boys. The initial cultural shock of Thebes had faded into a dull, heavy haze, replaced by a singular, overwhelming urge: sleep. As they moved through the darkening, winding streets of Thebes, under the pale glow of the rising moon, their steps grew sluggish and uncoordinated. "My legs are made of lead," Antigonus thought, his eyelids drooping heavily as he forced one foot in front of the other. Every stone in this cursed city feels like a mountain. If I stop walking, I'll drop right here in the dirt. Beside him, Pethan staggered slightly, catching himself against a whitewashed wall. How can they expect us to eat a feast? Pethan thought, a wave of profound dizziness washing over him. My bones ached down to the marrow. The road took everything we had, and the steam just melted whatever strength was left keeping us upright. 12-year-old Leonidas fared the worst. His small frame, taxed beyond its limits by the grueling march and the emotional upheaval of leaving home, simply gave out. His knees buckled and he stumbled, his vision blurring as the world spun around him. I can't walk another step, Leonidas thought, a tear of sheer exhaustion slipping down his dusty cheek. Mother, please, I want to go home. He slowed to a halt, leaning against a stone pillar, too tired to even lift his feet. Sensing the boy's collapse, Pamene stopped and turned. Without a word of reprimand, the seasoned general walked back, knelt down, and scooped the exhausted 12-year-old onto his broad, steady back. As Leonidas settled against him, his small, limp arms draping loosely over the general's shoulders, a sudden, heavy quiet settled over Pamene's. Beneath the heavy linen tunic, feeling the steady, faint rise and fall of the boy's chest and the lingering heat radiating from his skin, the rigid armor of the veteran commander softened. By the gods, Pamenes thought, a rare, tender ache blooming behind his ribs as he stood back up with the boy securely in tow. They carry themselves like princes, they stare us down with all the fierce pride of Pella, but under all that iron armor and defiance, they are just children. So impossibly young. He glanced back at the other 4 boys, Philip, Antigonus, Pethan, and Amyntar, stumbling through the dark, their eyes hollow with fatigue, missing mothers, fathers, and sisters, thousands of stadia away across brutal, unforgiving mountain passes. They had marched for weeks through dust and cold, only to be thrust into a strange, watchful city as political pawns. And tomorrow, the unrelenting machinery of Thebes would demand everything of them all over again, from dawn. A faint, bittersweet smile touched the corners of Pamenes' mouth in the moonlight. If I had been built like other men, if my life had not belonged entirely to the phalanx, the barracks, and the league, perhaps I would have taken a wife by now, he mused silently, feeling the gentle, rhythmic weight of Leonidas breathing against his neck. I might have had a son or daughter of my own. A boy just like this one, stumbling home after a long day's journey. Instead, the city had made him a soldier, a general, and now, by the cold calculus of statecraft, a jailer. Yet, as he carried the sleeping boy the final few paces toward the warmth and safety of his courtyard, the sudden, fierce warmth in his chest told him something else. Guardianship is a strange kind of fatherhood, Pamenes thought softly, stepping over the threshold into the lamplight. They were sent here as hostages to secure our borders. But tonight, they are simply my boys. Leonidas let out a faint, shuddering breath as his chest pressed against the general's warm shoulders. He's an enemy general, Leonidas thought, his conscious mind flickering weakly. A Theban who holds us hostage. Yet, as the solid, unwavering warmth of Pamenes' back radiated through him, carrying the faint scent of cedar oil and wood smoke, a profound, overwhelming wave of safety washed over the boy. It feels safe, he thought, the tension instantly draining from his small frame. Longing for his mother in Pella blurred with the unexpected shelter of this foreign soldier. Within seconds, enveloped in that solid comfort, Leonidas fell fast asleep, his head resting heavily against Pamenes' neck. Amyntar walked rigidly behind them, his jaw clenched, fighting the same crushing fatigue. Don't show weakness, Amyntar told himself, his fists tightly balled at his sides. They are watching. Even if my limbs shatter, I will not let them see a Macedonian break. When they finally crossed the threshold into the house of Pamenes, the inviting scent of roasted meats, rosemary, garlic, and fresh bread drifted from the main room, where an elegant banquet awaited them. But the promise of food was eclipsed by the sheer, bone-deep weariness pulling them toward the earth. On low tables, laden with gleaming black figure pottery, were dishes the boys hadn't seen in weeks. There were succulent cuts of roasted lamb, fragrant with rosemary and garlic, alongside platters of fresh fish, likely from the nearby Euripus Strait, baked with olives and lemon. There were bowls of rich, hearty lentil stew, steaming bread still warm from the oven, and vibrant salads of crisp greens, figs, and local cheeses. A large amphora of deep red Theban wine, diluted with water in the Greek custom, stood ready. Pamines gestured for the young princes and companions to take their places on the cushioned couches. "Come, young lords. A clean body deserves a well-fed one." Antigonus lowered himself onto a couch, eyeing the table with cautious skepticism. Roasted lamb and fine wine, presented with such polite grace, Antigonus thought, his fingers resting lightly near his plate. They strip us in the steam rooms to humble us, and now they feed us like honored guests. They want us comfortable, compliant, and deeply indebted to their hospitality. Beside him, Pethan's stomach let out an audible, rumbling growl, drawing a soft, embarrassed flush to his cheeks. "I don't care if it's a trap," Pethan thought, his eyes locked greedily onto the warm bread and sweet figs. "After weeks of chewing dried rations on horseback, I'd risk poison for a meal this good." 12-year-old Leonidas reached hesitatingly for a piece of fish, his shoulders finally dropping their tense hunch. "It smells incredible," Leonidas thought, relief washing over him as he took a small, cautious bite. "At least here, they don't starve their hostages. Maybe Thebes isn't a dungeon after all." A minter, however, tore off a hunk of bread with aggressive precision, his jaw tight. "Bread and honey to sweeten our chains," Amintor muttered inwardly, refusing to let his expression soften. "They think a good supper will make us forget we are prisoners of state. Let them feast us. We will take their strength and use it against them." Philip's stomach rumbled in anticipation alongside his companions. The dry, monotonous rations of the road had left him craving sustenance beyond mere necessity. He took a piece of lamb, its rich taste a revelation, and savored the warm, earthy stew. He found himself eating with a desperate, uninhibited hunger, a physical need he hadn't fully acknowledged until the first bite hit his tongue. Pamines watched them all, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. "By the gods, young lords, you eat as if you've been starved for a year." A warm smile softened the general's seasoned features. Having Philip and his companions in his home stirred a burgeoning paternal affection within him. Pamines was a man of the sacred band, a unit defined by intimate bonds and shared sacrifice. These boys were wards, hostages, and princes, but for now, they were sons under his care. While the foundation of their relationship was mentor and student, Pamines saw the raw potential in them, a flicker of the same fire that drove Pelopidas. The road fare was Spartan, General. Philip managed between bites, a sheepish grin on his face. "And this is a feast. I haven't tasted food like this since Pella." "Indeed," Pamines nodded, taking a sip of his diluted wine. "The bounty of Boeotia. It fuels our men and sharpens their minds. You will find, Philip, that in Thebes we pay attention to all aspects of a man's development, body, mind, and spirit. This is not merely about surviving, it is about thriving." As he ate, a profound realization settled over Philip. His body, still growing and developing, was a machine that required precise and abundant fuel. The rigorous training that awaited him in the gymnasium, the intellectual demands of the philosophers, and the nuances of military strategy would necessitate a new attention to his physical needs. The rich, wholesome food was not a luxury, but a vital component of the Theban way, a deliberate cultivation of robust health and vigor. This dinner felt like a necessary act of replenishment. He felt the warmth spreading through him, easing the last vestiges of travel weariness. He was no longer just a traveler. He was being prepared for the forge. "Tomorrow," Pamines said, his voice dropping to a serious tone that cut through the clatter of bronze and ceramic, "your true Theban education begins. It will be demanding, but it will forge you into the leaders Macedon will need." Glowing crucible. The Theban night was a tapestry of deeper shadows and sharper stars than Philip had ever known in Macedon. He sat by the window in his small, tidy room, the cool evening air carrying the faint, earthy scent of Boeotian fields, a fragrance that felt heavy and fertile, so different from the humid, salt-tinged breezes of Pella. Below, the street was quiet. The last echoes of the day's bustling welcome had faded into a gentle hush. The clay oil lamp on the small table cast a soft, warm glow, illuminating the unfamiliar, functional outlines of his new surroundings. Just hours ago, he had been one of dozens of boys, tired and dusty from the journey, riding into the roaring embrace of the Theban citizenry. Now he was a political hostage, a living pawn in the grand game of Greek power. Yet Pamines had been kind, his new room was cozy, and he was certainly not a slave. Still, the contrast was stark. His former life, the gilded furniture, the endless parade of servants, and the very air of unquestioned prerogative felt impossibly distant, almost a dream. The heavy oak door behind him creaked open, breaking his quiet reverie. 4 of his fellow Macedonian wards slipped into the room, seeking the familiar comfort of their own kind in the vast alien house. Leonidas dropped heavily onto the edge of Philip's wooden bed, rubbing his face with a groan. There isn't a single attendant in the corridor, Leonidas thought, his aristocratic pride stinging as he stared at the plain, woven blanket beneath him. If I want water in the middle of the night, I suppose I must fetch it myself like a common peltist. How long until they make us forget what it means to be royalty? They expect us to sleep on wool rough enough to scour a shield, Leonidas complained aloud, gesturing to the bed. Pamines smiles at us, but he houses us like auxiliary infantry. Pethan was already pacing the perimeter of the small room, his nervous, high-strung energy, making it impossible for him to sit still. He peered around the frame of the heavy door, analyzing the lock mechanisms and the layout of the corridor. It's too quiet, Pethan thought, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. They separate us into these neat little rooms to divide us. It makes it easier to watch our every move. Easier to eliminate us if the treaties back home break. It's a gilded cage, Leonidas Pethan muttered, his fingers drumming anxiously against the doorframe. Don't let the cozy hearth fool you. The windows are narrow, and the courtyard gates are guarded by veterans. We aren't guests here. A minter leaned against the plastered wall, crossing his arms with a sharp, cynical scoff. He carried his defiance like a weapon, refusing to let the heavy atmosphere of the estate cow him. Let them try to break us, a minter thought fiercely. They think because we are young, we will just absorb their Boeotian dirt and thank them for it. I would rather choke on it. Hostages, Pethan, a minter corrected, his voice dripping with venom. We are collateral. Pamines is just fattening us up with decent food, so we look healthy if they ever need to parade us before an executioner. Antigonus, standing quietly near the oil lamp, didn't join in the complaining. Possessing a fierce, calculating intellect, he watched Philip sitting calmly by the window. Amyntar and Leonidas are blind, Antigonus thought, narrowing his eyes as he studied the steady, unblinking focus on Philip's face. They are so busy mourning their lost servants that they don't see the real game. And Philip isn't mourning at all. What does he see out there in the dark? You're quiet, Philip, Antigonus said slowly, his deep voice cutting through the nervous chatter of the other 3. You haven't complained once since we unpacked our bags. Philip turned from the window, the soft light of the oil lamp catching the sharp, intelligent gleam in his eye. Surprisingly, the loss of luxury wasn't what truly mattered to him. The endless attention and the easy comforts of a prince's life suddenly seemed inconsequential, almost flimsy. His mind, already sharper than his years suggested, had been captivated by something far more substantial. He was in Thebes. Because you are all looking at the walls, Philip answered, his voice remarkably steady, devoid of the fear that gripped the others. You see a cage, but look out that window. The very name of the city hummed with power. This was the heart of Theban military might, the crucible that had forged a new era of warfare, and the home of the legendary heavy infantry. He had witnessed their disciplined grace on the training grounds of Pella, and felt the collective force of their presence. He had ridden alongside Pelopidas, the founder of their most formidable unit, a man whose charisma and strategic acumen had swayed kings and shattered empires. Pelopidas had spoken to him with unexpected directness, treating him as a vessel to be filled rather than a trophy to be displayed. A strange, exhilarating tremor ran through Philip as he looked at his companions. We are hostages, yes, Philip continued, his tone carrying a sudden magnetic gravity that silenced Leonidas and Pethan. But we are also standing inside the world's most outstanding academy. They think they have imprisoned us, but they have only stripped away our distractions. Antigonus stepped closer, a slow, understanding smile touching the corner of his mouth. I'm going to learn the secrets of their strength, Philip declared, his eyes burning with a quiet, undeniable ambition that seemed to draw all the air from the room. I will unravel the mysteries of their order. We will observe, absorb, and dissect every aspect of their military innovation, their political cunning, and their very way of life. By the time we return to Macedon, we will not just be princes. We will be weapons. By the time he was left alone in his simple, stone-walled room, the sun had long set. His entire body ached with a deep bone weariness. He slumped onto his simple cot, his mind cluttered with the day's lessons and sights. He picked up a stylus and a small wooden tablet. With a tired hand, he wrote a few brief formal words to the Macedonian court and his family. The message was respectful and to the point, a dutiful report from a prince to his regents. He did not mention the pain in his feet, the ache in his arm, or the strange, confusing nature of this new world. Instead, he wrote about what he knew to be true, the only things that mattered after such a long day. Philip stared down at the blank papyrus, his pen hovering in the dim lamplight. He thought of writing the truth, that his journey to Thebes was fraught with peril, nearly cut short when the tyrant's men closed in and almost seized him on the road. But he didn't. He had managed it himself. He had stabbed the man to death, and it was done. Why should I make my mother, my brother, and my sister worry about it? Philip thought bitterly, his jaw tightening as he pressed the stylus against the parchment. They can do nothing from Pella to save me and my boys from here. I need to save myself and my boys. Besides, as he looked back on the events since their arrival, his perspective had shifted. Theban General Pelopidas and Pamines were not the monsters he had feared them to be. They were sharp, calculated, and powerful, but they offered something far more valuable than empty protection, a crucible in which to forge their own survival. He dipped his reed pen into the ink and wrote carefully. To the esteemed court of Macedon and my dearest family. My journey to Thebes was fraught with peril, nearly cut short when the tyrant's men closed in and almost seized me on the road, but I managed to escape and am now safely in the custody of Theban command. My formal instruction is set to begin tomorrow under their guidance, spanning both military exercises and philosophical studies. While I anticipate the training will be rigorous, I'm in good health and am settling into the discipline of the city. I trust this message finds you well, and I will send a more detailed account when the opportunity presents itself. Your son, Philip, to be continued in Episode 5, Dawn of a New Life. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Talesia's Playlist. Volume 2, Laches, the Sacred Band Playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Join the Vanguard. A new episode drops every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 2. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.